Hi everyone, welcome back to Talks in Class. I'm Jenna here with you for another episode. I'm so happy to be here recording an episode for you guys this week, and thank you all for tuning in as always to the podcast. It really means a lot. I was just thinking it feels like a really long time in between episodes now that I'm doing every other week, even though I guess it's not really that long, but it feels like it's been forever. I am going to continue with the every other week schedule for now, but I will let you guys know as soon as that changes. I'm hoping to get back to a regular weekly schedule soon, but stay tuned for updates on that. Not really much new to report over here, although I do want to let everybody know, if you're a listener of the podcast and you remember the episode that I did a couple months ago, I think it was early February, about fitness and wellness and athleisure in the 2010s, I finally made the playlist. I know it's way overdue, but I finally made it this morning, the 2010s fitness class bangers playlist. It is called POV You're at SoulCycle in 2016, and it's full of some of my favorite fitness studio songs from that time period. I was a fitness instructor during this time, and I was thinking about this as I was making the playlist. We had it made when it came to music as instructors at this time. We didn't have to make any effort. Every single song felt like it was made for fitness classes. It was the vibe at the time. So this playlist is very ideal for working out. If you're looking for a little motivation, especially for cardio, throw on this playlist. It will get you going. I've been listening to these songs when I have been running, and they're very motivating. I mean, part of that's nostalgia, but I'm telling you, when those beats drop, there's nothing like it. So you can find the playlist on Spotify by searching either the playlist name, POV, You're at SoulCycle in 2016, or you can search my name, Jenna Barclay, or you can also find it on my Instagram in my playlists story highlight, along with a bunch of other playlists. There are some fun ones there actually, but they're all over the place. 90s, 2000s, 2010s, whatever. It's all there. Other than that, well, I guess it was my birthday last week, so that's of note. I turned 37. I can't even believe that, you guys. Like, it has been 16 years since I turned 21. How is that possible? That is wild. Actually, I don't know. It's like hard to wrap my mind around that. I don't feel 37. I don't know what 37 is supposed to feel like, but whatever it is, I don't feel that. So if you're out there listening and you're young, whatever that means, just know that someday you're going to reach whatever age in your mind right now sounds really old. And when you do reach it, you'll realize that it's not old at all. I don't know. That's my wisdom for you today. You're not old. Even if you are objectively old, age is just a number. You're as young as you feel. I really believe that. As always, I will kick it off with my what good happened. And other than turning another year older, which is always good, my what good happened this week is that speaking of fitness, I cleaned out a bunch of my workout clothes. This is so long overdue, and I love to keep my clothes as long as possible, but vast majority of my workout clothes are from when I worked in studios, particularly in like 2016. I feel like I bought all of my workout clothes in 2016. Some of them are still in great shape, but some of them, they were crusty. Okay, there was no life left in them. They had to go. There was no excuse for them being in my closet. So I did a little clean out, which always feels really good. But then I got a few new fun pieces to refresh it, including some colorful stuff, like some fun spring colors. I really do feel like putting on a cute little workout set helps my motivation. So I'm just going to tell myself that. For this week's episode, we are continuing our journey through the decade of the 2000s to talk about the evolution of basic girl fashion, as I call it, basically just fashion trends that myself and girls like me probably remember and participated in to some extent. And this week, we are diving into my maybe not favorite time period, but certainly my most memorable time period, which is the mid-2000s. When I think back on all the fashion trend eras that I have lived through and experienced and participated in, there are a couple that I feel are most central to my own personal fashion sense, or that maybe influenced my own style the most. But then there are others that feel really significant, even though my current style has evolved beyond them, basically. Trend eras that I outgrew really quickly, maybe as fast as I adopted them in some cases, but that still hold a really special place in my heart. And the early to mid 2000s is at the absolute top of that list. It is always my go-to whenever people ask me about my favorite fashion eras that I've experienced or that I've lived through. And I think that's largely because it represents my high school years, my teen years, kind of that core adolescent experience was during that time. And those are the years that I think a lot of us sort of establish our own style or start to establish our own style. We start to form our own identities and sort of become our own person. And for me personally, they were also just really fun years. I really, truly, honestly had so much fun in high school. I mean, it was high school, so I still kind of hated it at the time and complained about it and couldn't wait to get out of there. But it was genuinely fun. My friends and I had fun. I look back on it fondly because I remember having a good time. And fashion was really fun too. Say what you want about the 2000s, but it was anything but boring. And these fashion trends were definitely fun in a different way than the Y2K trends that came before them were fun, but fun nonetheless. As I mentioned in the last episode, the term McBling refers to that early to mid 2000s era where everything was bright, bold, and blingy, obviously, hence the name. But the term McBling specifically, I would assume is a reference to the idea of McMansions and just this idea of conspicuous displays of wealth, but with this air of tackiness or cheapness, maybe fakeness for sure. Like it's an illusion, it's a facade. It's something that's meant to convey wealth. It's something that's meant to establish this sense of superiority, even power maybe. And all of that just perfectly captures the essence of this time period, of this McBling era. It was luxury, but it was not sophisticated, okay? Make no mistakes. It was expensive, but nothing about it was refined or classy. It was almost an exaggeration of what I think of as this sort of like post-war, ultra-American, kind of idealized version of American life or picture of American life. It was almost competitive in a way. It really had that keeping up with the Joneses feel to it just the whole time period in general. It was about, keeping up and having things and exclusivity and superiority, kind of like not just keeping up with the Joneses, but maybe being a little bit better than the Joneses. And being that this was, of course, the post 9/11 time period. I mean, that was so significant. This general cultural attitude really makes a lot of sense, right? This hyper-American ideal on a bigger picture, if you lived through it or you remember, the rhetoric at the time that was everywhere. I mean, we're talking everything from political figures to pop culture and mainstream media. It was very patriotic. It was very us versus them, meaning America versus everybody else, good versus evil. Like these kind of traditional wartime tropes were very, very present. And it was about ultimately establishing America, us, right, as superior, as better, as, better than the rest of the world, as better than them, whatever you want to call it, however you want to position it. It was this, you're either with us or against us mentality. America will come out on top. America will win because America is superior, right? We are superior. We're better. That was the messaging that was drilled into us. I mean, it was everywhere. And of course, I didn't recognize this at the time at all, but looking back, I mean, it really smacks you in the face. It was so pervasive. It was everywhere. And that post 9/11, wartime rhetoric, it just infiltrated every facet of not just pop culture, but society in general. I mean, this was, when I say this was drilled into us, it truly was. And it influenced everything. It trickled down to individuals in this way that it kind of manifested as this cultural idea at the time of flaunting wealth, right? Establishing your superiority via possessions that you have. It was wearing labels, spending, and not just spending, but shamelessly showing off your expensive stuff, your labels. It felt like a time too that was very full of envy. It was really kind of built on the idea of envy and wanting, right? Wanting to have what everybody else had, but also to try to be a little bit better than everybody else, whatever that meant for you, whether that meant being richer or skinnier or more famous, having more expensive clothes, having a tinier dog in your little purse, having a more expensive car in your driveway, whatever it was. Looking back on it, I mean, it was fun at the time. I was a teenager, but looking back, it was dark. A lot of it was pretty dark. Our obsession with celebrity disturbs me now looking back, and it really bred this absolutely toxic paparazzi culture, which wasn't necessarily new, but it was wild during this time. And I talked about this briefly in the 2000s life Instagram versus reality episode. Body image discourse at that time, I mean, like, I can't even explain. I'm horrified when I think about it looking back. The tabloids tore apart every single female celebrity, and honestly, probably men too. I just don't really remember that. They tore them to shreds for anything related to their appearance. Anything, but especially their weight, of course. This was always the headline, something about their weight, whether they were too big or too small. It was always mentioned. Fashion and pop culture trends were also really wrapped up in labels and brand names, but it was just about consumption, really. It was like, who can buy more stuff and the most expensive stuff they can find. But also bodies. There was this big shift in fashion when I look back from a focus on clothes to a focus really being on the body in the clothes. Like in the Y2K era, we had all these cool fabrics and textures, and we had big baggy pants and chunky shoes and funky, hairstyles. And then a few years later, it was just all about skin. It was all about the most form-fitting, tight garments you could find. There were no baggy pants, no oversized fitting anything. I mean, the clothes at the time were tight and they were tiny. There was no way that you could hide your body in those styles because the trends were about the bodies as much as they were about the clothes. And it made it really, really hard for everybody, but especially anybody who didn't have a very particular type of body, which is, most people. And the clothes and the labels, designer labels were suddenly on everything. And they weren't just there, they were in your face. They were loud, they were bold. Every item that you could possibly imagine suddenly had a designer version of it that you didn't even know existed. And that was suddenly the version that you had to have. I've mentioned this before too, but growing up in such a small kind of working class, rural town, I did not experience the bullying that a lot of other people experienced with regard to like not having the right brand name clothing. Nobody was getting bullied in my school for wearing the non-name brand version of things. But this period was so focused on that. Like brands were so central to the trends. That's always the case, but especially during this time period. I can only imagine how bad that was for people who were in, schools or just general areas where kids did have a lot of access to those brands. And there was kind of that expectation set that everybody would have them. This was, after all, in my mind, the height of the Abercrombie and Fitch era. And I mean, Y2K, that time period really saw the rise of Abercrombie and Fitch. But to me, the McBling era is where Abercrombie was at the peak. I mean, it was like the king amongst young people. And it makes sense. I think that it makes perfect sense that this was so popular because when you think about it, it embodied everything that the McBling era in general embodied, right? Exclusivity, money, consumption, that sort of girl next door, all-American sex appeal. Like it was innocence, but it was sex at the same time. And that was like a very big thing at this time. Even fame and the idea of popularity, I mean, this was all part of the brand's image. It was part of the brand. And in the way that the employees and the models were treated almost like celebrity, it just so perfectly captures the essence of that era. And I mean, that sounds dramatic, but like really, these were all things that were very desired or we were being conditioned to desire at the time. And Abercrombie and Fitch just took them all and packaged them up and delivered them to us in this brand. And it also had this sort of underlying misogyny for sure, but objectification, these things that were really at the foundation of pop culture and for sure fashion at that time. If Y2K was progressive and future focused, McBling was not. It was just, it wasn't. It was, very different. In a lot of ways, this time period saw kind of a return to more, air quotes, traditional American ideals, except in this exaggerated way that felt sort of, I don't know what the word is, scandalous almost, trashy. It was almost like a parody of American culture, and we were just living in it. Like we weren't in on the joke. Somebody was making a parody of our culture, but we weren't in on it. We were going along with it. And I had a great time during this time period. It was so fun. Looking back, what a time to be a teenager, really. It was a great time. There was a lot of amazing pop culture stuff going on, but at the same time, I was a size 2 white girl whose parents bought me Abercrombie and Fitch without too much begging. Like, I was the target audience. So obviously, because of that, and also just because it was so normalized, like it was so pervasive in culture, I think a lot of us, like me, just didn't realize. We didn't see a lot of these more negative aspects at the time. But anyway, back to the popularity of designer everything, which was so important in this era. It's funny now because social media has made us so accepting of the idea of dupes or even straight up knockoffs. I mean, there can be an argument made for dupes versus knockoffs, but it's generally accepted now. People make whole videos showing all of their, cheaper versions of things. But back in the 2000s, that was a cardinal sin, okay? Having a fake was not what you wanted. Not that it stopped me at all. I literally used to order fake Chanel logo rhinestone earrings from China, I think they came from. I bought them on eBay. I still remember they were $5 a pair, or just under $5 a pair. So I would order multiple pairs at a time because inevitably I would lose them or they would turn, colors because they were very, very fake. They would take months to arrive and they would show up at my mom's house in a little envelope in the mailbox, and I wore those things shamelessly. I did not care, but again, small town Wisconsin, nobody cared. No one was looking at my earrings, nor did they care. So fake or not, it was the time of labels. You had to have labels, and not just on high designer stuff, not just the Louis Vuitton monogram bag that we saw celebrities carrying everywhere, but for the first time in my life that I can really remember, we had more accessible luxury items or designer items that became really, really trendy at the time. And the two examples that always come to mind for me are designer denim and then Von Dutch just as a brand. As we moved out of Y2K into the full-blown McBling time period, denim in general became huge. It was everywhere. I mean, we had a lot of amazing 70s influence styles during the 2000s, but a lot of the denim trends specifically really reflected that. And there's still some of my favorite denim trends I've ever seen. I mean, talk about fun. We had these big flare jeans with no back pockets and then a big built-in denim belt that was like attached to the jeans with a giant round buckle on it, or the iconic lace-up jeans, whether they laced up the side or they laced up the crotch. Mine laced up the crotch. There was so much novelty denim. Celebrities were wearing denim jumpsuits. We saw denim on red carpets. We saw whale tails on red carpets. I mean, all bets were off. By the way, if you're unfamiliar with the whale tail, I'm talking about the G-string peeking out the back of the ultra low-rise jeans, something I hope we never revisit. And those early 2000s, like pre-2004 denim trends really disappeared by the mid-2000s. But I would say between the years of 2001 and about 2004, we had some amazing cool denim. But along with that, along with all these novelty denim items, came this rise of designer denim or luxury denim, whatever you want to call it, brands like Seven for All Mankind, Citizens of Humanity, and then a little later in the decade, of course, we had brands like True Religion, Rock and Republic, Miss Me. These brands became so popular. I remember there was this denim brand called Earl Jeans. I don't know if anybody else remembers this, but I literally found out about this brand's existence from the Gossip Girl books in like 2002. In one of the first books, they talk about Blair owning a pair of Earl jeans, and I became obsessed with this brand because of them. And then there was Blue Cult denim, another one that I feel like people never remember, which I discovered because the Olsen twins wore them on the cover of Rolling Stone in 2003. I have it, I have the issue sitting right behind me. You guys, I literally tracked these jeans down, which in 2003 meant first reading the fine print on the Olsen twins magazine spread in Rolling Stone to find out what the jeans brand was and then the style, and then calling on the phone, like dialing, looking up in a phone book and then dialing multiple stores to find somewhere that actually carried the brand, had the jeans, and then had them in my size. And then, of course, I had to save up my allowance money or my money from whatever my little part-time after-school job was. And honestly, I probably had to beg my mom to give me some money too, because these jeans were expensive. I mean, the Olsen twins were wearing them. They were not cheap. And then I had to drive to Minneapolis, or more likely have my mom drive me to Minneapolis. I don't think I drove myself, to buy them, because nowhere in my or near my small town actually carried this brand of jeans. So much work for something that we could literally do now with the touch of a button. Like, we had to do so much work, and I still have them. I still have those jeans. But what I think was so special about designer denim was that it was relatively accessible to normal people. It was expensive, obviously, yes, but it wasn't impossible for me to imagine saving up $160 or whatever to buy a pair of 7 jeans, like it was to imagine me buying a pair of Dior shoes or a Chanel handbag. Like, that was never going to happen, but I could possibly, within the realm of possibility, buy the same designer jeans that I saw Nicole Richie wearing on The Simple Life, and that was beyond amazing to me. And then, of course, there were brands like Von Dutch that exploded onto the scene, Juicy Couture with the tracksuits. You know, they had the same impact because it wasn't like me buying a multicolored Dooney and Burke bag that sort of resembled the multicolored Louis Vuitton bag that Jessica Simpson carried. In the case of Von Dutch and the case of Juicy, you could literally, as a relatively normal person, buy the exact same item that the celebrities were wearing in the tabloids that you were reading. And this corresponded so perfectly with the boom, just absolute explosion of celebrity culture, tabloid culture, whatever you want to call it during this time period, this obsession with celebrities. In 2002, MTV gave us the reality show The Osbournes, which was a reality show about Ozzy Osbourne, a very famous man, and his family, his real life family. And that was really the first example of a celebrity-focused reality television show, like a show that existed entirely in order to give us a look into the, you know, quote unquote, real lives of celebrities. And it exploded. It was wildly popular. I was obsessed with it. And then we got MTV Cribs, where we got to see inside their homes, and we got Newlyweds with Nick and Jessica. I mean, talk about iconic. We got The Simple Life. I mean, suddenly we had this new access to celebrities in a way that we literally had never had before. We didn't have to wait for them to pop up on TV and do a maybe 5-minute interview on a talk show, or we didn't have to wait for them to be featured in our favorite magazine. We could turn on the TV in our living room and literally watch Jessica Simpson do laundry or eat tuna or whatever it was. And combine this with the insane paparazzi culture at the time. It was such a celebrity obsessed era, but it was shameless. That's what I think of when I think back on kind of the celebrity culture at the time. It was shameless on both sides, or at least that's how it felt to me. Everyone seemed so fame hungry, like being famous was the ultimate dream or the ultimate goal. And of course it ties into other things at the time, you know, the focus on wealth, the focus on money and buying expensive things. People associate fame, obviously, with wealth. And people also were finding these new avenues to achieve fame and wealth, things like reality TV. You know, we had these people like Paris Hilton, who in previous generations would have been considered a socialite, just a socialite, a rich girl who's rich. But now here she was starring in her own reality TV show. She was becoming famous in her own right, whether you like it or not, you know, basically early examples of what we now think of her as influencers. And then on the other side, of course, on the media side, just absolutely shameless in the things that they would write about them. Nothing was off limits. It was very gross. In 2004, of course, Perez Hilton launched his gossip site, is basically what it was. It was just a celebrity gossip blog. This was in the early days of blogging, but it was an online tabloid. And anyone who lived through the Perez Hilton era, I mean, you remember, he was vicious, and all the tabloids were vicious, but there was something about Perez. He was so mean and snarky. And, this was the early days, relatively speaking, of the internet. People just were not as careful, like security measures that we have now, or things that we're just aware to do to protect ourselves online. They just didn't exist. We didn't think about those things. I mean, the bling ring, the kids who very famously robbed celebrity homes in the 2000s, found the celebrity addresses online and were able to look at Google Earth images of the houses to figure out how to actually get onto those properties and access the homes. And they were able to track when the celebrities would be home or not in their home, that, these celebrities that they were targeting, through things like celebrity gossip blogs reporting on their whereabouts, or even the celebrities themselves tweeting that they were, off somewhere and not at their home, meaning that their house was likely sitting empty and available for these kids to go literally rob. And Perez really had this style that, I mean, it just went beyond the paparazzi. Even truly nothing was off limits for Perez. And he was vicious. He was very vicious, especially to a few female celebrities. I always think about Misha Barton. He just never had anything nice to say about her. It was a rough time. But looking back for me, I think a big part of the celebrity appeal was that a lot of them were wearing these more lowbrow styles, right? These more accessible items, or things that I felt were more accessible, that I could not only find at a store, but I could actually wear. Like, I could wear Von Dutch jeans to high school. I could wear a Juicy Couture zip up to high school. I never did. I wore a knockoff, but it wasn't like a runway outfit, a gown or something like that. It was just this big shift fashion-wise, I think, from the 90s, when we still had a little bit of sophistication happening in fashion. And of course, this was appealing to me because, one, I was a teenager, and two, I lived in a really small town. I didn't have access to expensive, sophisticated things, or really anything that could be considered like classy. I was shopping at American Eagle. That was my fancy store. The Olive Garden was our fancy restaurant. You know what I mean? So this whole thing was perfect for me. And what I think is particularly interesting about McBling is that the McBling style really evolved throughout the 2000s. And as it did, the trashy style, or like the flavor of trashy, kind of evolved as well. In the earliest days of McBling, what I think of is like peak quintessential McBling. It was micro mini skirts, especially those pleated ones, like the little denim pleated skirts, ultra low-rise jeans, a lot of innuendo graphic tees. We wore a lot of things that we should not have been wearing at our ages. Stores like American Eagle and Abercrombie, they had these on lock, and they went hard on the innuendo graphic tees. T-shirts that said things like "brunettes do it better," or "who needs brains when you have these" written across the chest of a shirt. Or one of my personal favorites, "if you're hot, I'm single." So that was the vibe at the time. We had the clear plastic sunglasses. We had fur trim jackets. Again, just a lot of 70s influence that was really fun and I always loved. The shimmers and kind of the softer metallics, the pearlized finish of Y2K turned into harder metallics. It was rhinestones on everything. I mean, everything had a rhinestone. Everything had a bling. Your cell phone, your sunglasses, whatever it was, there was probably a rhinestone somewhere on it. Colors also changed. Everything got really, really bright in this era. In the very, very early, kind of the transitional moment between Y2K and McBling, I remember just a ton of red and a ton of pink colors in general. The hot pink really stayed, though. That stuck around through the core of McBling. We had bright blues, we had bright greens. I mean, if you look at celebrity photos, especially from that time, it was just an explosion of bright color. Makeup, too, I mean, it got a lot harsher. It got darker. This is the time when I really started in on the super heavy black eyeliner, just like all the way around my eyeball, just layers of it with like caked on awful foundation and this sticky, like glossiest lips, and your hair would stick to it. Like that was the makeup look. And then of course, Playboy. We cannot talk about McBling and not talk about Playboy, but not just Playboy as a brand or an image being really popular, which it was. I mean, Playboy Bunny, everything was everywhere. But it was also the whole look of Playboy, kind of that, I don't know what you call it, like bimbo aesthetic really is what it was. It was bleach hair with like long, really bad extensions. Nobody was trying to make those extensions look natural. That was not the point. Ultra dark tan, big fake acrylic nails. Again, no one was trying to make that look natural. That was not the point. Big platform flip-flops with like a teeny tiny little skirt and a super tight tank top with a push-up water bra from Victoria's Secret. I actually had a bra. I just threw it away. Literally the last time I was at my mom's. I'm pretty sure it was from Victoria's Secret. It had little like chicken cutlet inserts, but they were filled with water, and you could stick it into this little pocket in the bra. Not just that, but the bra itself was padded. So it was padded, and then it also had the water push up inside. I mean, what? I was a teenager. Why? This was also the time of the Rhinestone BB shirts, which I went all in on. I had at least 3 that I remember. It was the Von Dutch bowler bags and those Candies wood shoes. It was a vibe, okay? It was a vibe. But toward the mid-2000s, the Ed Hardy thing, that's the best I can describe it as, the Ed Hardy thing, you know what I mean. That really started to take hold, and that was the new brand of tacky that replaced this sort of earlier version. It was the contrast stitching jeans, so really dark jeans with the white stitching, rhinestone dog tag necklaces. Again, a lot of rhinestones on everything, jeans, jewelry, sweatshirts, burnout tees in general, you know, the shirts that kind of had a slightly see-through look to them. A lot of those in general, but I'm embarrassed to say this, but I was a really big fan of this brand called Sinful, and I bought it at the Buckle. I think it was an Affliction brand, like an off-brand or a sister brand to Affliction. Maybe it was the women's version of Affliction, but it was not cute. The whole thing started to look very aggressive and like douchey. I mean, let's just say it like it is. It was douchey. And this really kind of stuck around through the entire rest of the decade. I mean, right up until the Jersey Shore era, which we will eventually get to. And around this time, for me, it was 2005, like specifically, that was the pivotal year. There was this shift in fashion, a really big shift. It was when all traces of 90s influence in fashion were completely, not just gone, but like evaporated, completely erased. And to me now on social media and, you know, just in general conversations about nostalgic fashion, this seems to be the time period that most people are actually referencing when they're talking about the 2000s, even when they say early 2000s, which is a personal pet peeve of mine, because this is specifically late to mid 2000s fashion, like 2005 to 2008, this time period. Shirts got super long. This is when this happened. Shirts suddenly got really long. This is when we started layering like crazy. Like we started wearing a plain tank under a lace tank, under a t-shirt, under a zip-up sweatshirt. It was a lot of clothes happening during this time. Those cool 70s inspired novelty jeans were completely gone by this time, and we were doing more of a standard boot cut style versus a big flare. And it's also when we started to see really, really heavy embellishments, especially on jeans. 2 of my absolute favorite pairs of jeans, probably ever, are from this time period, both from 2005 exactly, I think, actually. One is a pair of 7 For All Mankind jeans with crystals on the back pocket that I saved a lot of money for a long time to buy, and a pair of super ripped up, like absolutely destroyed paint splatter jeans with beaded back pockets from Abercrombie that my mom bought me and instructed me to hide in the trunk, because after we left the mall that day, we went to see my grandma, and she knew that my grandma would absolutely go into orbit if she ever saw those jeans, let alone if she knew how much they cost. And both of these jeans were stupid expensive. I mean, like, the more ripped up and destroyed they were, the more expensive they were. And this is, of course, why I still have them at almost 37 years old. But anyway, this was a big vibe shift. This time period was a big vibe shift. A lot of kind of indie styles that have been happening more out of the spotlight started to gain a lot more mainstream popularity. They started to influence mainstream fashion around this time, probably largely due to the internet, honestly, an increase in media use, like social media use with things like MySpace. But there was emo style, there was scene, there was a really heavy boho thing happening around this time. But also, like I mentioned, sort of this douchey Ed Hardy thing that was happening. It was sort of all over the place. There were a lot of different trend aesthetics kind of commingling at the popular normal mall stores, really similar to the early 2010s now that I think about it in that way. And a lot of mainstream fashion, like I said, started to take influence from, I think, some of these more indie aesthetics, or these aesthetics that had been around for a while but not in mainstream fashion. We saw a huge increase in accessories at this time as well, just kind of in general. For me personally, this was really boho leaning, you know, a little bit of indie stuff, but it was beaded necklaces. It was a ton of stacked bangles. Like, I loved just like bracelets up my arm, belts slung low on the hips, of course, especially those big disc ones, big statement earrings, like a chandelier earring, or had a lot of beaded earrings, cocktail rings, like big, chunky, cheap cocktail rings. Bags also got huge. In the early 2000s, they were very small, like they have been in the last few years. And suddenly, towards the end of the 2000s, they were gigantic suitcases. I mean, it was a huge shift. Sunglasses too, they got really big. I mean, I still remember getting my first pair of giant round sunglasses, and I got made fun of so badly for looking like a bug, but they were cool. I stand by those. Shoes, on the other hand, went the other direction. They got sleeker instead of the kind of chunky platform styles. This was the time of the pointed toe kitten heel, which I thought I looked so chic wearing. And jackets also got really small. Like, any sort of outer layer was just really tiny. So suddenly we had these super long shirts with these teeny tiny little jackets over them. So we would wear things like shrugs, whether it was sequined or it was tied, or a little bolero jacket, and these just like tiny tops layered over these super long shirts that were then layered over our bootcut jeans with a stupid useless belt on our hips and a giant suitcase purse. I actually still remember, like specifically remember the first time I ever wore a belt around my hips over a shirt. It was 2005. I remember the exact outfit. I had this long sleeve shirt from Hollister. It was kind of a dark teal color. And it was one of the first shirts I remember that I had that was really long, because I specifically remember thinking, why is this shirt so long? It stood out to me as different. So I wore that shirt, probably layered over another tank top, because those shirts at the time were so paper thin. They were all see-through, with my Abercrombie jeans with the beaded butt pockets that I loved. And I got this metallic bronze kind of like woven belt, one of those big chunky ones. So I wore that around my hips over my teal shirt with the buckle off to the side, obviously, with this brown beaded necklace. You guys, I don't care. That outfit slayed. Do the kids still say slayed? That outfit slayed. I don't care. But I distinctly remember showing up to my friend's house where we all hung out during this time period in that outfit for the very first time, and getting basically ripped to shreds, probably just by the guys. I don't really remember the girls saying anything, but the guys roasted me so hard. But I was so confident. Like, I did not care. I was so confident, probably a little too confident in that outfit. I might have even worn my brown fur-lined Abercrombie hoodie jacket thing. I'm not even sure if that was supposed to be a hoodie or a jacket, but I might have worn that over that whole look. It was a moment. And there was this amazing sweet spot in 2006, 2007-ish for this really specific style that I don't know what people call it, but I like to call it boho glam or indie glam. And I loved it. It was still really 70s inspired. It was before we hit the full-blown 80s revival that came very soon after that. But it was like indie sleaze, but the cool version of indie sleaze meets boho with this 70s glam flavor to it. I don't know how to describe it, but you guys already know because I never shut up about it. This was the Nicole Richie, the Rachel Zoe Olsen twins style of that time. And still to this day, this is absolutely the most influenced I have ever been by celebrity fashion. And the most lasting influence for sure, because in a lot of ways, this is still really important to my core personal style. But that vibe shift, that shift in 2005 set us on a big fashion change. And I feel like things changed a lot from about 2005 to like 2008 or so. First of all, skinny jeans became a thing during that era, and they took a really long time to fully gain ground. But even back in the mid 2000s, they were popular with especially more emo and scene styles. For those of us more basic girls who weren't ready to adopt the skinny jean yet, we had this really awful moment from about 2005 to 2007 or so when we would basically tight roll our bootcut jeans either into a giant cuff. I mean, we're talking like a 5-inch cuff or bigger that would sit like at our ankles, basically creating an ankle length skinny jean, or even worse, maybe we would tight roll them and then stuff them into our tall Uggs, because tall Uggs were the only acceptable form of Ugg at that time. So much fabric. I mean, imagine those Uggs back then were bulky. I mean, they were much bulkier than today's Uggs. And then we had all that denim stuffed in there, just sweat. So much sweat, sweaty feet all the time. And a lot of the 70s influence that I loved so much really started to give way to a strong 80s influence in fashion. We had tunic length tops with leggings, cropped leggings specifically, maybe even with a lace trim under them, the big plastic belts around our waist, just a lot of plastic accessories in general. I went through this brief phase probably around 2007 when I loved to color coordinate my cheap plastic accessories. So I'd have a cheap plastic belt in red, let's say, and then I would pair that cheap plastic red belt with red plastic earrings and a big red plastic bangle bracelet worn over a tunic length top, obviously, with leggings and just like a tiny little jacket, tiny little crop jacket over that look. And I thought I looked amazing. And somehow wearing that outfit, I had the nerve to look my mother in the face and tell her that I didn't understand when she told me that my clothes looked like the 80s. There was a lot of prints around that time too, hearts, a lot of stripes, but a lot of like kind of cheesy prints, like the polka dots had a big moment, and a lot of just bold and kind of cheap looking, like plain cheap looking solid colored clothes is the best way I can describe it. Like early glimpses of the American Apparel vibe almost. I had so many of these solid color tunic length tops from Forever 21 during this time. They had this wide band of fabric along the V-neck and then kind of like some ruching. And then of course they had that really wide elastic band at the bottom that would sit like across the widest part of your thigh and then just kind of like balloon out in the middle. I had sleeveless ones, I had short sleeved ones, so many, and so boring yet tacky at the same time. It was a delicate mix, but man, I pulled it off somehow. And that was kind of the overall feeling of the entire decade of the 2000s, really was just tacky. Not necessarily always boring, but tacky. She stayed strong through the 2000s. And I think the height of tackiness obviously came at the end of the decade, which we will get to in the next episode. But for now, I will leave you with a list, as always. And since I don't really talk much about guys' fashion trends, I'm going to pay a little respect to some of the most memorable, not necessarily the good, but memorable guys' fashion trends from the mid-2000s. Number 5 is Ryan Cabrera hair, is what I'm calling it. Obviously made famous by Ryan Cabrera, but really everybody had this hair in the mid to late 2000s. You know the hair, spiked straight up, very tall, almost like early Pauly D looking hair, maybe with some highlights. I don't know why anybody thought this was a good idea. I am sorry. Men of 2005 to 2008, it was not a good look. Not a good look. And a lot of guys were fooled into thinking that it was. Number 4, dog tag necklaces. Not necessarily specific to the guys, but I do for some reason think of this more as a guy's trend. And actually, if I'm being completely honest about that, I think the reason I associate this more with guys than with women's fashion is because of the episode of The Hills when Lauren buys Jason a set of dog tag necklaces for his birthday. Not only are those dog tags hideous, but we literally thought that that was the coolest trend. Bonus points if they had like a gothic cross or just anything with a lot of rhinestones, maybe an old English initial for your name on them. I mean, the tackier the better. Load it up with the rhinestones. Number 3 is, of course, the polo shirt, popped collar and additional polo shirt layered, optional but encouraged. Again, not necessarily unique to the gentleman, but I don't know. There's something about a pastel polo shirt and the Ryan Cabrera hair and ripped up jeans that is just not working. It was not a look. It was not a moment. It was not good. But very iconic nonetheless. Number 2, Abercrombie and Fitch necklaces, or really just any variation of like bro necklace of the time. In the early 2000s, this would take the form of definitely a puka shell necklace. But by the later part of the 2000s, I had a lot of guy friends who wore those kind of like leather strap necklaces with some beads on them. And I can only describe them as Abercrombie necklaces because I am certain that 99% of those guys got those necklaces at Abercrombie. They went with every outfit. I had some guy friends who I think they probably wore the same necklace for like 5 or more years. I'm not even confident that they ever took it off, ever, until it probably fell apart, disintegrated. After so many years of wearing it, they were an absolute staple amongst the guys that I knew. And this seems to be something that is unique more to normal people versus celebrities. And those are always my favorite fashion trends to look back on because somehow these things emerged from the population of teenagers organically and just kind of spread amongst all of them, like scrunched hair and straightened bangs. And number 1, of course, a style that truly defined the decade, flip-flops paired with bootcut jeans. And listen, I can't fault the guys. This was basically my uniform for the entirety of the decade of the 2000s. So no shade, no hate. Do I want to see any guys wearing ratty old jeans that have been dragging in the dirt with their toes out? Not necessarily, but it was the vibe at the time. And on that note, I will leave you here. We will pick up next time talking about the later part of the 2000s. So stay tuned for that. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye.